It is a phenomenon, and an unfortunately increasing phenomenon, of young people being pushed out of public schools. And once they are pushed out from public schools for a variety of reasons, which we'll get into as we go on with this discussion, I would assume, but we know that they become increasingly at risk for not only poor economic outcomes, which have been obviously very well stated in a lot of journals, a lot of newspaper, for example, you know, what it costs someone who doesn't get a high school diploma, for example, over the course of his or her lifetime and the like, what it costs a community by way of reduced earnings and reduced taxing ability to pay taxes and the like, contributions to the community. But what we're talking about here is the way in which, by being pushed out of school, these young people become increasingly at risk for criminal behavior and getting themselves engaged in the juvenile justice system and ultimately into the adult justice system. And there had been many pieces of research over the course of the past decade for sure, but probably over the last 20 years, which indicate to us that in fact those results are what occurs when someone is pushed out of school, ultimately does not receive a diploma. Really is that part of the pipeline where many warning signs have already been ignored. And a child is a lot further into that pipeline when we start focusing on the issues of concern that we usually talk about in the school to prison pipeline than we could be if we started to concentrate on truancy. And here's what I mean by that. In our focus on school to prison pipeline in the recent past, in the past 2 or 3 years, we really focused on issues of school discipline, zero tolerance policies which lead to school discipline and ultimately suspension and expulsion from school. We've also focused on the increased, again because of the Columbine phenomenon, for example, concerns for school safety, the increasing use of law enforcement personnel in school buildings, creating, one would argue, and actually can be demonstrated in research, an increased opportunity for what would ordinarily be minor disputes or conflicts that might arise in a school setting, not to be resolved by the vice principal or the principal or school personnel in general, but an immediate response to call the police and engage it as, or define it therefore as an issue for public safety, as opposed to something that could be resolved in the normal setting of school. Criminalizing conduct that wasn't criminalized before. That has been a focus, and it is absolutely important and imperative that we do that, particularly because it leads to increasing what we already know in our criminal justice and juvenile justice systems are huge disproportionalities from the standpoint of kids of color, kids who have been involved in the foster care system, and the like. However, that's an intervention orientation that, while I certainly applaud raising our level of concern about, when we take a look at a little deeper, what we know is that warning signs, the same kinds of warning signs about disengagement in school, and that's really what we're talking about, pushing kids out of school, subjecting them to out-of-school suspensions, for example, begins a phenomenon of disengagement from the educational process in the young person, even before they begin to, or if they do, fall prey to the engagement in the juvenile justice system. So for a while there's an opportunity to call that back, to try to re-engage the young person in school. And by doing that, and you can do that before expulsions and suspensions have operated, you can do it by looking at a couple of warning signs. The warning signs being beginning to be a failure in school in some core courses, but most appropriately for this discussion, absenteeism. Kids are voting with their feet, as it were. They're not understanding. They have the issues in their family. There are community issues that combine and cause them not to want to go to school. All of these various factors that are coming into play really result in absenteeism, and that's our earliest and best, I would argue, warning sign, and that's when we really need to pay attention, not after the kid is further along into this, what we know now is a pipeline. Even from their very first absence, there is a requirement on the part of the school to contact the parent and find out, inquire what was the reason for the absence. Within 2 absences, the school is required to engage the parents in a conference, again, as to how the school can be helpful to bring the child back to school. Then, if there are 5 absences within a month or more than 10 within a school year, the school is obligated, if the other situations have not, or the other engagements have not resolved the absenteeism, the school is required to file a petition. That petition is a petition in court, and the petition seeks the court's assistance in, first of all, declaring that this child is subject to the Becca law, that they are, by definition, truant, because the requisite number of absences have occurred, and look to an order from the court to return to school, and an order to the school to say, here's what kinds of solutions need to be looked at in order to re-engage this child into school. Research done just in the context of the Models for Change initiative here in the state of Washington, done by Washington State University, primarily focusing on Benton Franklin counties, and then additional research that's been done by Dr. Tom George from the Administrative Office of the Courts here in the state of Washington, based upon the results of his assessment tool that he developed, which is now, it's the WARNS, the risk and needs of student absenteeism, Washington absenteeism, really do focus on particular issues relating to school failure, that the child does not feel successful in school and begins to retreat from that lack of success. And in particular, it's really doesn't look to all classes in school, all of the curriculum, but particularly the core areas of reading, writing, arithmetic, sort of thing. And then there are, beyond that, elements that relate to family circumstances, which is a key component, and that is why the involvement of the family in the solution is so critical, and why if the school is not able to connect with the family, or if the court is not able to have the family become involved, it's a virtual prescription for failure. The family has to be supportive of the child attending school, and to do whatever it needs to do to try to get whatever supports it needs in order to permit the child to come to school. So that would be a second one. A third major element has to do with mental health concerns. You know, there are depression, anxiety, those kinds of diagnosable mental health issues that are found to be in an indicator of a reason for excessive absenteeism.